Okay, so for those who have started to join, our meeting is going to begin just a little bit after 5. We want to give everyone enough time to hop online. So in the meantime, please just sit tight and we'll get started soon. Thank you. All right, it is 5 o'clock. We're going to wait just a few more minutes for anyone else who wants to join that they can hop online. For those of you who are just joining, we will be starting soon. Thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We just want to thank you, first of all, for joining us tonight. Our staff will be giving a presentation on the recommended water rate adjustments, and then we will have time to answer questions and provide additional information. So please consider saving your questions until the end of the presentation. Just a few housekeeping rules. When submitting a question to us, you can use the Q&A function of Zoom, which you'll find in the toolbar on your screen. We'll be responding to these at the end of the presentation. We'll also be monitoring any messages you send in the chat as well. Please know that this meeting is being recorded, and we do plan on sharing the recording on our website later this week so other community members, including yourselves, can reference it. I would also like to mention briefly that in addition to this virtual meeting, we are holding 2 in-person meetings. One is Tuesday, March 1st, and the other is Wednesday, March 9th. And you can find all those details regarding those meetings on our website by visiting pwpweb.com/events. So with that, I'd like to now introduce our Assistant General Manager of Finance, Sherry Thomas. Sherry, you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Renee. I appreciate the introduction. And thank you all. Welcome this afternoon to everyone who is joining us for this discussion. We appreciate your time. We recognize we are right before your dinner hour. So we want to make sure we were respectful of your time and give you something that you hope will be of value to you. I do want to welcome also certain members of the Water and Power team. We have team members available from all over the water department today to answer questions that you may have and provide information. I also welcome Jeffrey Keitlinger. He is our interim general manager. He's joining us today, and obviously he's a retiree from the Metropolitan Water District, so he would have some special information about Met Water if someone should have those questions at the end of our presentation. We have members of the water engineering team here who can answer questions about specific projects and investments that the water system will be making. And I'm also joined by Chris Ojeda and members of the finance team to talk a little bit more about the rates themselves and the money that goes into our programs and projects. So Chris, if you wouldn't mind advancing the PowerPoint one more, please. So we did want to start by giving you just a brief background, a reminder for some folks about Pasadena's water delivery system. We have a service territory that covers about 26 square miles. It includes, of course, all of the city of Pasadena, and we also serve customers in Altadena and a portion of LA County, mostly the Chapman Woods area in the southeast corner of the city. So we are a community-owned utility, and that means that all of you who are customers of the utility have an ownership stake. So that gives you unique benefits and privileges of receiving the service and high quality water from Pasadena. And it also, you have some responsibilities that go with owning a water system. And that's what we want to talk a little bit about tonight, to talk about what we are doing as your water utility, making the necessary investments, doing the things that we need to make sure that you receive that high quality service that you are so accustomed to. So we serve, as I mentioned, about 172,000 customers through about 38,000 meter connections to our distribution system. It's pretty complex. We have 500 miles of water mains. That seems quite extensive for 26 square miles of service territory, but it gives you a sense of the scope of the service in the community that we serve. Next, please. Thank you. And where does Pasadena's water come from? You know, we've talked about this at some length in various other venues, but we basically get our water in Pasadena from 2 primary sources. So we're located on top of an active groundwater basin that we call the Raymond Basin. And we get about 30 to 40% of our water extracted from the groundwater basin through those pumps and wells that we talked about in the previous slide. So, but the majority of our water is imported, and it's purchased from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, also known as MWD. And so Pasadena is a founding member of the Metropolitan Water District. We are actively engaged as a member of the entire MWD community. And again, we purchase the majority of our water. So we're that reliance that we have on imported water means that engagement that we have with MWD is very important to our future water supply. And I don't think it's a secret to anyone on this call that the Western United States, in particular California, is extremely challenged with drought conditions that have now gone over multiple years, perhaps even more than 10 years. So in spite of the spectacular weather that we had yesterday afternoon, and some early rainfall that we had this year, we are still extraordinarily challenged. So one of the MWD's primary strategies right now is to look at its integrated resource plan, which is the plan that it goes through to determine where those resources are going to come from. What is the reliability? What is the sustainability? That process is ongoing at MWD right now, and Pasadena is engaged in it as a member. Next, please, Chris. So Metropolitan gets its, Pasadena, as we mentioned before, about 30 to 40% of its water comes from that Raymond Basin, which is located under Pasadena. And we do that by extracting water through 18 groundwater wells. And the takeaway from this map is that those little purple dots that you see scattered throughout this map are indicative of where those wells are located. So you can see they're located all throughout Pasadena's water service territory. And so they're based on where their locations are determined. There's a lot of complex engineering that goes into that, including where the water is, where the water levels are, making sure that our distribution system is properly balanced. But the takeaway, like I said, is we have wells everywhere. And one of our major initiatives for capital investment is looking at those wells and making sure that they are still producing to their maximum capacity, and making the necessary investments to replace them or refurbish them if needed. Next, please. So the Metropolitan Water District, as we mentioned, is our primary service provider and commodity provider, and it gets its water from two main sources. Most of you are familiar with these, but Metropolitan is the purveyor, one of the largest purveyors of water in the United States. And its two primary sources of water come from Northern California and from the Colorado River. So the water coming from Northern California is delivered to Central and Southern California through the State Water Project, and also to Southern California, primarily from the Colorado River. So both of them are, by definition, extremely complex delivery structures. They in and of themselves require major investment to ensure that they are operable and efficient. And both of those resources are extraordinarily challenged also by the drought conditions, not only in California, but because the Colorado River extends into other Western states, all of those states are extremely challenged. So the primary resources for Metropolitan both are struggling with supplies at this time. So it just kind of underscores or exacerbates the overall issues that we are facing in the Western United States and in California with our water supply. Next, please. So one of the things, almost every time I attend or participate in one of these discussions, we talk about what's happening with usage in Pasadena. What's happening, how are we? We're obviously in the last 5 to 10 years have seen some significant developments, and a lot of questions have been raised about the use of water in Pasadena. So I like this graph. I think it tells a pretty simple but compelling story. So essentially it spans roughly a 70-year time frame, going back to 1952 and ending in 2021 in this particular case. And so the objective here is to show what's happened to the annual water consumption year over year during that almost 70-year time span. So the blue bars indicate the water usage or water consumption by Pasadena's customers each year. And the green line at the top shows the growth in the population of Pasadena's water service territory over that same time frame. So back in 1952, when these records started, we served about 125,000 customers. And by the end of this measurement period, we're at roughly 170,000 customers. And the interesting takeaway, of course, is we had an increase in usage through the 1980s. We sustained that higher level of usage until the early 2000s, at which point really the first kind of round of drought years approached, and we got serious about conservation and about concerns about sustainability, and taking a hard look at what we needed to do as an agency and as a community to reduce our water consumption. So the takeaway is we did that. What a terrific response, from Pasadena. I was a part of the Pasadena Water and Power Department for essentially that whole time. And as a customer and a resident in this city myself, it was pretty amazing to see what this community was capable of doing. And so at the end of that time span, essentially what we're doing is, we're serving almost 30% more people with the same water that we were serving back in 1952. So, kudos to this community for taking this seriously and embracing sustainability and conservation. And, here we are again, like I said, multiple years into a multiple year drought. But I think this is indicative of what we can do as a community. Next, please. So the water industry, uses so many acronyms. Sometimes I know it can be difficult for people to even understand what their utility bill says. We use words like acre feet. We use words like HCF, which means 100 cubic feet. We say billing unit, all of that, may seem designed to confuse, and it really isn't. But one of the focuses I wanted to talk today is what is a billing unit, because that really does drive your bill. So our bills are printed with the letters HCF, which stands for 100 cubic feet. It's the same thing as a billing unit. It's exactly the same unit of measure. It means 748 gallons of water. So each HCF or billing unit that you see on your bill represents using an increment of 748 gallons. So the confusion from the terminology, I'm sure I'm not going to fix all of that tonight, but hopefully we can, get a sense. And I like this image because this gentleman is a now retired general manager from another water agency. He's a big guy. He's about 6'4", 6'5". And he thought to himself, how do I convey this to my customers? What is one HCF or one billing unit? So he's standing in front of a tank that holds about 800 gallons of water. So that black line for 748 gallons is one billing unit. So by today's rates in Pasadena, our customers pay about $5.89 for one of those big tanks up to that black line that says 748 gallons. That costs about $5.89, roughly 0.8 of a penny per gallon at today's rates. So just for sake of what does that actually translate to, if you take a 10-minute shower, of course, with a low flow shower head, that would cost you about 25 cents in Pasadena. So there's a lot of value there, but hopefully the intent here is to explain a little bit more about what that means and how you can translate that into something that you use every day. Next, please. So staying on that theme for just a moment about what an HCF is, as I just mentioned, in Pasadena today, our HCF or billing unit cost is about $5.89. It's comprised of a couple of different parts. So I wanted to talk a little bit about each of those because they will all be affected by the recommended increases that will go before the City Council next month. So we have three major components of our rate. We have the capital improvement charge, which is a charge per billing unit, and it generates money that we use to invest in our infrastructure, our pipe replacement, our reservoir replacements. It's money that we use to actually do long-term investments in the infrastructure. Right now, it's about $1 per billing unit. The commodity charge is the water itself. What we talked about earlier, the water that we pump from the ground, the water that we import from Metropolitan Water District, that's paid for from that yellow part in the middle of this bar chart, costs about $2.42 per billing unit for the water itself. And then the gray part on the bottom is what we call the distribution and customer charge. That's a fixed charge, and that fixed cost is based on how big a meter you have. And it pays for the day-to-day operations of the water department. The people that are out there making sure that the water's flowing, making sure that the water quality is there, It's the people on the phone, answering phones, it's doing the billing, it's the day-to-day operations of the water department. And as I mentioned, right now, that's about 589 per HCF. Next, please. So why now? Why do we need to do adjustments? So it doesn't happen randomly. I don't think I can emphasize enough that PWP staff, from the construction and the engineering crew to the finance group, we spend a lot of time and a lot of effort on developing financial plans so that we can see where we're going, see where we are, and make sure that we make rate recommendations and adjustments that are matching what our costs are, that make sure that we recover enough money to do what needs to be done without charging more than we need to. So we develop a plan to make sure that we are able to meet those requirements. And frankly, it's as simple as all of us are experiencing every day. Our costs are going up, just like your household costs are going up. So if we import 60 or 70% of our water from the Metropolitan Water District, MWD is raising its rates, is at least 4%, maybe more. So every acre foot of water that we buy from Metropolitan is going to cost us more going forward than it does today. Our cost for all of our supplies is higher. Our tools, our treatment compounds, our fuel, even our salary costs, all of those costs are going higher year over year compared to what we experienced in the past. We've all talked and heard a lot about supply chain, what's happening to the materials that we need to operate every day, what we need to make sure that the system functions properly. We're experiencing those same supply chain concerns and challenges that other industries are, and in fact, many of you are as well. And frankly, the system is 80 years old, 100 years old, 120 years old in some cases. So, our responsibility as customers and as owners of the system is to make the investments that we need to make sure that it continues to work for the next 50 years and the next 100 years. And, that's our responsibility. And we have adopted recently a long-term plan. It was called the Water System and Resources Plan, or WSRP. Many members of our community were engaged in that process. And that really laid out a roadmap for us. And it said, this is what we as a community believe is important, to make the necessary investments to make sure that we can be sustainable, be a little bit more self-reliant, perhaps less reliant on imported water from Metropolitan, and storage so that we can manage emergencies, and that we can ensure that high quality water continues into the future. So that laid out a plan, but that plan is costs money. It requires us to do investing. And so the rate proposals that we have are aligned with that plan to make sure that we generate money to meet those goals. And we continue, as I mentioned earlier, to be a great conservation community. So the state of California, under the governor's leadership, actually put in place a 15% voluntary reduction in water use in California last summer. And so the idea there is, compared to 2020, we are all being asked to reduce our water usage by 15%. So the city of Pasadena also adopted that same goal. And we have what we call a water supply shortage plans. We are now at level 2 of 4 possible levels. And the intent there is to encourage our community to reduce consumption by another 15% from 2020. Well, part of our revenues that we generate are based on how much water we sell. So while we are certainly supportive of and encouraging of all the conservation efforts and programs that we have, we also have to recognize that it reduces the money that is generated by our rates. And so part of these adjustments will offset a part of that conservation. And as always, whatever we recommend has to be legal. So the voters approved Proposition 218 many years ago, and we go through the necessary efforts to make sure that the rates that we recommend to our city council are comprehensive and are compliant with the requirements of Proposition 218. Next, please. So a little snapshot, I talked a little bit before about, the financial plan that we do. We thought we'd put together just a quick summary of what that looked like for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. So we are right now in fiscal 2022. It runs from July 1st to June 30th of each respective year. And so when we did this plan for 2022, what we came up with is the rates that are in place today, excuse me, generate about $65.5 million to support all of the operations and all of the necessary capital investment in our water system. And during that same time frame, our projected spend or disbursements was about $77 million. So we had a discrepancy there of about $11.5 million. And so part of that plan says, how are we going to manage that? What needs to happen? So the analysis indicates that the rate increases that we are in fact recommending to the City Council for approval are going to generate some additional money. So for 2022, the recommended rates would generate about $2.5 million in new or additional money. And in 2023, about 3.8 million in additional money. It doesn't solve the problem, right? So we still end up, even after the rate increases are implemented, with a discrepancy. So it would be about 9 million at the end of fiscal 2022 and about 10.5 million at the end of 2023. As strange as it sounds, that's part of the plan. So in order for us to move this forward on a long-term basis, we borrow money from time to time to ensure that we have enough money to do that capital investment that we talked about. And we in fact did that in 2020 and 2021. So part of that discrepancy or shortfall will be funded from the use of those borrowed monies, what we're calling bond proceeds here. And that's part of the plan. That long-term investment should not be paid for entirely by today's customers. And by borrowing money, we pay it back over a 30-year time frame, which means that customers in the future will be paying a part of the costs for the improvements that we make today. So it's a very calculated, very carefully analyzed plan. And what we have in bond proceeds, what we have in available reserves, and what we will generate from the rate proposal that we have in front of the City Council will balance those requirements and make sure that we have enough money to do what needs to be done to make the necessary investments and operate the system. Next, please. I'm not going to spend too much time here. For those who are interested, as I mentioned, that little stack we saw before with the blue on top and the yellow in the middle and the gray on the bottom. Each one of those components is recommended for increase over the 2-year time period that we're talking about. So these charts show what happens to each of those components. So the box there on the left is actually the gray component at the bottom of that stack I talked about. So depending on how big your meter is, your rates are going to go from, for example, most of you have a 3/4 inch meter connected to your home. So right now you pay $24.28 a month in a fixed charge just to have that meter there. That would go from $24.28 to $25.18 in April of this year and up to $26 in January of next year. So that's just to explain how this table is laid out. And you can certainly take a look at this at your leisure. And always, if you have questions, staff is here to answer those. Next, please. And this kind of sums it up. So we took a sample customer here. Again, about 70% of Pasadena's customers, and more like 80% of our residential customers have a meter connection, meaning the size of your pipe connected to the city is 3/4 inch. So we use that as an example. And so this would be a typical residential customer with a typical 3/4 inch meter using 15 billing units or 15 of those big tanks every month. So today, in total, that customer pays $72.86 for their water bill. All of the components added together, $72.86. The first increase that we are recommending that would take effect in April of this year would take that $72.86 up to $78.06, or an increase of $5.20 a month. The second increase, which would take effect in January of 2023, would increase that bill by another $5.62 a month for a total of $83.68. So this is just a way to summarize and hopefully show people an image of what their bill would look like now compared to after each of those increases are implemented. Next, please. Skipping through this real quick. So, of interest, of course, not every customer with a 3/4 inch meter, we all use different amounts of water each month. So this slide shows what happens to the customer bill for that 3/4 inch meter using different amounts of water. 10 billing units, 15, 20, 30. So the takeaway here is there is a incentive to use less water. So the increased percentage for a small user, like someone who uses 10 of those tanks that I showed earlier, over the 2 cycle here is about 13%. If you use 30 of those tanks a month, then your increase over the 2 years is about 17%. So lest there be an idea that, I don't have any control over what's happening to me, the ability to conserve and to manage the amount of water that you consume is reflected in the percentage increases on your bill. Next, please. Same thing here, just a different meter size, so we don't have to dwell on this. Next, please. So in March, in fact, on March 14th of 2022, the Water and Power staff will go to the City Council in the form of a public hearing and recommend increases to the water rates as we have been discussing tonight. So we are going to recommend 2 separate increases, one to be effective in April of this year, a follow-on increase to be effective in January of 2023. We will be increasing those components of the rate that we talked about, the yellow part, the blue part, the gray part, for each of those increases. And roughly they are 7.1 and 7.2%. So that $5.89, goes up by about 7% the first time and about 7% the second time. And so I think after the second increase, the $5.89 is about $6.30 for each one of those tanks with that gentleman standing in front of it. So that will be our recommendation after discussion and a public hearing and comment on March 14th. We're also doing some cleanup of language that's in the water rate ordinance that will not affect the actual rates themselves, but we need to do this as a formal process. So that's the action that will be put before the City Council on March 14th. I believe the time set for the public hearing is 5 o'clock. Everyone is welcome to submit, a written comment before 5 o'clock on March 14th. There will also be an opportunity for you to participate in that meeting. I'm anticipating, based on the way things are still continuing with the pandemic, that it will still be a remote meeting, but there will be an opportunity for you to voice comment during the meeting as well. Next, please. And so this is a summary of what's coming up and what's happened. So in December, we went to the City Council and requested that they set the date for the hearing. And that was done in January of 2022. And so during the months of February and March, as Renee mentioned, we are going to have a number of public meetings. We've also published a lot of information, both on the website and information, and I think a bill stuffer went out on knowing people where they could get more information. The intent here is to make sure we have as much access for people to learn about this as possible. And then, as I mentioned, on March 14th, we would go to the City Council for the public hearing, and the rates would become effective on April 1st of 2022, and again on January 1st of 2023, presuming that the City Council ultimately does approve the staff recommendation. Next, please. So that concludes the formal presentation for this evening. Obviously, as Renee mentioned at the beginning, we are here to have further discussion with you, whether you submit your questions today or you have questions in person that you want to talk to tonight. We'll have 2 more of these in person coming up in March. So there's plenty of opportunity, and we welcome always comments. So I may not have all the answers myself, but that's why, as I mentioned, we have staff from across the water department the specialists in engineering, the specialists in finance who can address those questions. So with that, I will turn this back over to Renee, and we can take questions as they are available. Thank you.
So as Sherry mentioned, we have now entered the question and answer portion of our meeting tonight. So as a reminder, you can submit a question one of two ways. There is a Q&A function of Zoom where you can just type in your question and we will answer it live. We also have what's called a raise hand function. So if you do raise your hand, that'll let us know that you'd like to ask your question live, and we'll go ahead and unmute you and you can do so. So with that, if anyone has any questions, I don't see any in the chat or in the Q&A so far, but we are on standby and ready to answer anything that comes in. We'll give people just a few moments to ask any questions. Raise your hand. And again, we are also monitoring the chat function. So if it's easier for you to put your question in the chat box, you can do that as well.
And as Renee mentioned, obviously, like I said, if not now, whenever, we really do want to hear from you. This is only made better by communications that we have, with our customers, with our community. So I think, anything that we happily take the feedback. And, sometimes the answers are not what everybody wants to hear, but it's important that we have this exchange. So I think I see a hand up.
Yes, so I see Richard has a question to ask. So Richard, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You are welcome to ask your question now.
Yes, I had sent in several questions earlier today and sent them to the mayor as well as the city clerk's office and to the Pasadena Now. And I was wondering, well, I wasn't being able to get here at 5 o'clock because my grandkids were having piano lessons in this same room here. So I want to know why my questions aren't there for you to answer.
So I can start this one off, Richard. Thank you so much, first of all, for submitting questions to the mayor and city council. If you were submitting those also to the city clerk, I'm going to assume that those were interpreted as questions for the public hearing on March 14th, which would not be shared with us at this time.
I think it was for this meeting.
Oh, it was for this meeting. Okay. I can check and see if we received anything from them, but we are here now. If you remember your questions, we are more than happy to talk them through with you.
Well, I'm sure that Sherry knows a lot of the same ones because I heard her program and it sounds like the same one she did several years ago when they were trying to increase water rates as well. I just think that we need to know how much the public has actually saved in water through their conservation effort and how much PWP has saved in their water conservation when we've had all this new water that's been had to be brought in to service all these new buildings that we've built. And that water was coming in all the time when they knew that there were new buildings. So why didn't they plug those numbers into their formula to figure out what the rates should be way back, several years ago? There's a whole bunch of my questions, and I'll have more of them, but I've asked the PWP hundreds of questions, and one of the main things that I do want to know more about is the Raymond Basin and all the chemicals that plan to be having to be treated and blended and put chemicals in them to make the water safe to drink. We never talk about that. There's never anything talked about with our groundwater, and we need to save more groundwater, but we don't seem to be even concerned about it. We never even talk about it. And if we're planning to get more groundwater in, that water is going to flow into the basin and it's going to move all those toxic chemicals around, and somebody's going to get them in their water that they're drinking. And maybe there's some health risks that we're never talking about, such as things that people get from thyroid problems, etc. Yeah, so there's just a whole bunch of things that PWP doesn't talk about. They never have any meetings with the public all through these years. Never. They only come out when they want something, and then they come up with some cockamamie plan that's going to work, and it never does. We need more details of their plan and how much water the PWP allots us, how much we've been using, how much we pay for it. There's all kinds of questions that people should be asking. And I'm asking them of how much, why we need an increase now. I just don't need, I mean, it's nice to have it, but I think it's, we're killing our trees in the city left and right. On my street, there's 4 of them that were taken down in the last month. So we're not, people are conserving water, but we're not even taking care of our infrastructure. And talk about one other thing, and is how could you lose 8% of their water? Where could that have gone, and how many acre feet of water is that? I mean, there's questions after questions after questions that need to be answered before you start giving you a water increase. How much is being used in the next few years for pay raises, and how much is going into pensions and stuff out of this total that we're having to put in? And I would also like to know the amount of water each meter is entitled to. I think there used to be 4 different things in the past, but these big meters that they put into these apartment buildings and office buildings, you know, I think that they're paying a hefty price, but they should be paying even a lot more, because this is all new water to them that they're getting. And we don't even know whether there's going to be some new laws maybe changed from the state or whatever else, in the federal government, whatever, soon. Maybe we won't be able to have the water rights that we used to have. They may be shrunk. And so we have to have more information, and we don't get any.
Yes. Yeah.
PWP.
And
So
we can definitely address some of the questions that you brought up, Richard.
And I'll have more, but I wanted to hear the answers to the questions I asked, because most of the time it takes too long for them to answer my questions. And usually there's another hearing beforehand, or, you know, I've asked to go through the treatment plant way back in like December. And, you know, I waited until after Christmas and New Year's and all that stuff. But the water department hasn't invited me to come and do that. And I wanted other people to come along as well. Let's just see how we take care of our water, that we want to go to the underground water to 50% of what we're going to get. But there's still an awful lot of stuff in that Raymond Basin that we don't even know about. And what about all the new pharmaceutical stuff that's getting put into the system?
Well, why don't we start with
talking about health.
Let's start with your question about water quality, because I know we do have some staff on here who can assist with that.
So Renee, if I might suggest something,
Yes.
I agree. We should answer all the questions that we are able to tonight. So Richard, you know, I remember you, obviously, you know, we've had many discussions in the past. So what I would suggest for the benefit of everyone on this call is that we do retrieve those questions from the city clerk's office, because they're quite extensive, and I don't know that we can do justice to them all in this forum, but we can provide, you know, written responses to your questions and post them on a public forum, so that not only the members who are here tonight, but other interested members of the community can also access the responses that we prepare. So I think that's probably the best way to deal with it comprehensively. But the questions that you raised are, you know, they're not unique to you, Richard. We've had a lot of customers and interested parties with regard to development and water supply. You know, how are we managing that over the long term? And, you know, those are questions that are, they're not only Water and Power's to answer. Obviously, the planning department and other city decision makers, including our policymakers on the council, you know, ultimately make the decisions about development in the city. However, you know, as I you may have missed it, and I apologize for that. But one of the slides that we presented tonight, and I don't know if you can go back to it, Chris, this is the one with the water usage. So I think it's slide number 7. So just dwelling on that just for a moment for your benefit, Richard, is, this I think is a testament. This is the water usage in Pasadena year over year for the last 70 years, including those years during which this development, the most recent development, has occurred. And so there are many, many complex factors that go into the type of development and the not only water usage, obviously, but traffic and, air pollution and density and all the things that go into it. But one of them is available water. And the availability of water thanks to our conservation programs and thanks to the drought tolerant plants, mostly because of the extraordinary the efficiency of the building and the development that's done. Our water consumption in Pasadena has actually overall declined during this time period. So that's due to, like I said, a huge number of factors. But it is one of the inputs that we have as a city department into what happens in the future. So in terms of water supply and water quality, all of the questions that you raised, Richard, are paramount importance to us also, especially availability of water in the basin and, what happens with pumping. And, I can't speak to the response that you have or have not gotten from a personal outlook, but suffice it to say that, we are regularly engaged with other members of the Raymond Basin and the discussions about the condition and health of the basin and the connections that we have to the Metropolitan Water District and their ability to provide us with a sustainable, reliable supply. All of that goes into our planning and our not only on the financial side, but on the supply side. So I don't think, like I said, we can satisfactorily address the details of all of your questions here, but we will commit as a department to retrieving those questions and preparing a written response for you that we can send directly to you and also post publicly for the other members, not only of this meeting, but others to see it.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll make sure, as Sherry mentioned, Richard, that those questions, once they're sent to you, are also posted on our webpage. So another question that we received in the chat is the purpose of the increase due to maintenance of equipment only, or upgrading the systems, or the cost of doing business?
Can I say yes, yes, and yes? So all of those factors are involved in this. The reason we have the rate divided into those different components is because the money that we collect from those rates and charges go towards all of the things that you mentioned. So we do have some of the revenue that goes towards the cost of doing business. Like I mentioned, some of those basic costs are just increasing. We're paying more for fuel to run our pumps and our trucks, just like you are. So those kinds of costs are going higher, and that's just the cost of doing business, and those costs are higher. So that's a portion of this. But probably at least as much or more of the new revenues that we would generate are going towards investment, long-term investment in the system. So what we're calling here is an upgrade to the system has to do with that strategic plan that we put together. How many miles of distribution mains do we replace in a given year or over a 5-year span? What's happening to the condition of our reservoirs? Richard mentioned earlier some of the, water losses that we experience. It happens for a number of reasons. Pasadena as a water agency actually does not have a lot of major water main breaks. When you look at other water suppliers, we had seen significant improvements over the years because we have been investing and replacing our water mains. So our water losses have actually come down, but that is part of it. If the older the system gets, the more water leaks you have, the more seepage you have. That's also true for our big reservoirs. So a lot of what we're doing with not only these recommended rate increases, but some that may be forthcoming in the future are to make those long-term investments in our equipment and in our infrastructure to make sure that what we have today is improved. And when we need to replace it, we replace it.
So a second question that came in the chat is this: is the rate increase and the percentage of rate increases a done deal?
No, it is not. In fact, the reason we're having this one and other, community discussions is to get feedback from the community that we can incorporate into our discussion with the city council. The city council has the ultimate authority for setting the rates, and they will do that on March 14th as a result of the public hearing. So this is a staff recommendation, and it's based on the best information that we have available, what staff believes is the best path forward, but it is not a done deal, and only the city council can actually set the rates.
So that's the extent of the questions we have in the chat and sent in. So just as a reminder, if you have any other questions, if you have any follow-up questions, go ahead and place them in the chat or raise your hand. All right, and I think,
I have another question.
okay, I was gonna say, I think Richard,
Yeah,
I see you raising your hand, so
okay.
go ahead.
I'm wondering, what are we doing for recycled water? I'm sure we must be losing a tremendous amount of water just from pouring it into the ocean or down the river, you might say, or wherever it goes to the recycling plant. What are we doing about, can you give us some information of how much water we're saving? Don't use that as a conservation thing because nobody sees it. I mean, there's just water going everywhere and we don't have the details of what's really going on. And you're not doing anything about catching and saving water. You haven't been doing it. You should have been doing it, but you didn't do it. You had a budget and everything else, but you spent it on something else.
All right, so the question is about recycled water and water loss. If Sherry or Brad wants to take that one on.
So I think I can certainly defer this to Brad and the engineers with regard to the recycled projects. I think, Richard, one of the important distinctions is the stormwater and runoff capture and reuse of water. So those are two, distinctly different projects and different systems that would do that. So the Water and Power Department would be responsible mostly for developing reuse and recyclable water supplies. The capture of storm runoff and the repurposing of water that runs down the street on a day like yesterday really is something that we collaborate with, but it's primarily the responsibility in our city of the Public Works Department, and in many cases, even the County of Los Angeles. So, I think, Brad, you probably have a more elegant answer than that in terms of from an engineering standpoint. But we do have funds in our budget for continuing to look for every opportunity to develop recycled, non-potable, reusable water programs. And you may not have seen the results, Richard, but we definitely have them. So I think that our water conservation teams can speak to the investments that we've made in everything from gray water programs to rainwater capture, all of the things that our homeowners are doing that are funded by, in part by money from Water and Power. And from a bigger context, we're looking always at our investment in the recycling project located up in Glendale, the recycled plant. Pasadena has an interest in that facility. We have not, executed that program in its entirety yet, but we continue to work with Glendale and Los Angeles, the other party in that project, to determine what is the most cost-effective and beneficial way for Pasadena to benefit from that investment. So, it's not nothing, but those are also programs that they're valued, and we determine, where is the most economic and most sustainable, what looks at a value for all of our customers. So those are complex projects that, need and require us to do, additional work, but they are not without value. And so, Brad, I don't know if you or Gary have anything to offer there.
Hi, I'm Brad Bowman, one of the engineering managers, and I've got Gary here also. an engineer for the department. When it comes to the sewage and capturing the sewage water and doing a recycle water project, part of the problem Pasadena has on doing that is the fact that our sewage gets treated many miles away from Pasadena. It flows out of Pasadena. And so to be able to create a recycle water project where we capture the sewage and at a treatment plant, it would be really expensive to bring that water back into Pasadena. However, we're joining with MWD in working on building regional recycle water treatment plants and being able to use that water so it doesn't leave the region anyway. When it comes to stormwater capture, we've got numerous projects where we're trying to capture that water, both that come down in the Arroyo Seco water flow and Eaton Canyon. And we're trying to capture that water and recharge our groundwater basin. So we're working hard to do that. So anything else, Gary, to answer that? Oh, also, we're using some of our well water that actually has contaminant of nitrate in it and piping that directly to do irrigation now. So we're being able to use some of that water and bring out some of those wells that had been turned off because of contamination. So we're trying to better use the groundwater we have.
Thank you, Brad. I did see someone else's hand go up, but I think you might have put it down. So if that was you, Linda, yes. Okay, go ahead, Linda. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the great presentation. I just wanted to ask, I know that there are a lot of variable components when you look at an income statement, like, income coming in, expenses, and those variable expenses, and then there are fixed expenses. And there are times that when you, for instance, with salaries, let's say you normally give a 6% salary increase, you have to kind of maybe not give a 6%, maybe do only a 2% or a 3%, or there are products that the organization may have bought that are brand, and maybe you go to an off-brand product to save on cost. And so, because I know there are certain people that in certain positions in the city that are making like $500,000 compared to other cities. And I'm just saying, what all is going into those variable? Because when you look at, like, for instance, with my phone, it will show me the bulk of my storage consumption is on photos, right? So when you look at all the expenses, what are the biggest expenses for the organization, and also personnel, and what areas can be kind of cut back on? Because we're all having to cut back, and not everybody's getting the salary increases, or maybe I don't go to Starbucks every day and I have to go to McDonald's and buy a McDonald's coffee. I mean, I'm just using that analogy, but I'm just saying, is that evaluation also being taken place when you were showing us the numbers of, even with the increases, how you still would have a shortfall, but did you consider realistically cutting back on expenses in salaries and like you mentioned, tools, maybe not buying the top of the line tool, but a tool that's an off-brand but does the same job? I mean, just there are areas where you can cut back as an organization. I mean, I've gone to the emergency room and they'll charge the insurance company $5,000 for a Band-Aid. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but so that's, I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate, but you know what I'm trying to say, I hope.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Linda.
You.
Yeah, but you're far more articulate than you give yourself credit for. So those are excellent points. And you know, you're absolutely right about that. So a couple of things. You know, we go through basically every single line item of expense that we have first and foremost in an effort to look where we can reduce costs. Right now, I would say almost half of the costs of running the water department are buying the water. So that's actually, you know, I would call that a fixed cost, right? So in order to meet the demands for water that we have, the water that we purchase from the Metropolitan Water District at their rates, and the costs that we incur to pump water out of the ground. That's electricity and fuel to run the pumps. And that just gets us the water itself. That's half of the overall total budget that we have. Another big component of it is electricity. So we have electricity to run the pumps and run the distribution system, to pump the water, you know, across town, to pump it up the hills to the customers that are in the higher regions, to run the treatment facilities. So between the purchased water, the water we buy, and the cost to pump it out of the ground, and the electricity to move it, you know, we've already covered roughly 70% of our total available money. So the water utility, the costs for its people, the salary costs and the benefit costs and that those associated to the people are roughly 15 to 18% of the total amount of money that we spend. And the rest of it is, as you mentioned, tools and gasoline for the vehicles and all the things that it takes to operate the utility. So the challenge that we face, and we have in recent years especially, most of the city employees have gone with very small salary increases in the 1% to 2% range, essentially. And we also have vacant positions that we have not filled. In some cases, for many months, and in some cases for even longer, in an effort to try to manage those costs. That creates a situation where the people that are here work harder. So we balance, overtime costs that we might incur for people that get paid overtime, and hold some of those positions vacant if it's more cost effective to do that. In my mind, that's not a great long-term sustainable solution to this. We need to fill positions that need to be filled, but it is, an example of how we look at it. You could always come up with, you could always do more, and there's certainly room for that discussion. But as the person oversees the finances for the department, I feel quite comfortable that a lot of work has already been done to reduce the expenses that we incur before we would come forward to ask for rate increases.
Thank you, Sherry. So at this time, we don't have any other questions. So if anyone else has a follow-up question or another comment, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Let me see.
So in the meantime, like I said, we have certainly used up all of your time that we had planned to. So while we wait for that, again, I just want to thank everyone on behalf of the Water and Power Department for being a part of this and for being interested, for caring about what happens to your water system, for having the kind of thoughtful questions that you have. And we will make sure that we address the questions that Richard raised and make them available to everyone. And that would be not only those of you who are on this call, but others who might be interested also. So we really appreciate it. Like I said, it takes a lot to come out and have this kind of discussion, and it's what we're here for. So we hope some of the questions were answered today. And if you come up with something that you didn't think of today, you always have an opportunity to submit it after the fact as well. Yes.
So I don't see any other questions coming through. We will stay on for a little bit longer, but also, like Sherry mentioned, this meeting has been recorded and we will be posting a copy of it on our website so that you can come back and reference it. And if you ever want to attend another one of these meetings, we are having 2 in-person ones in the month of March, one on March 1st and one on March 9th, and you can find all those details on our website. Thank you, everyone. And I do believe Richard has a follow-up, I believe. Let me see. Where'd your name go, Richard?
Yes, Sherry, I think that the one thing that would cost a lot more money when you were talking about the water costing so much money, the water that if we had a full Raymond Basin, the water would be half of what we pay Metropolitan Water District. So I would think that we should be working on doing something more to the Raymond Basin, but we have to wait and let it rain too, you know? But supposedly Metropolitan, I've asked questions before about buying surplus water. And I know that just sort of came into one of these things that I was reading about you guys, who's saying that now that if we get excess water, maybe they'll let us buy it, whatever else. Well, you know, I said that a long time ago. And that's what they should start doing is if we can't get, and we're not going to be, if this global warming is doing what it is, it's only going to get hotter. We're going to lose more trees and everything else. We're going to have to buy more water and it's only going to get more expensive, but we got to figure out a way to put more water in the Raymond Basin that's safe for us to drink and it's less expensive. Because don't forget, you still have to, all those chemicals that you forgot to put into the mix when you were talking about what the costs are. I know that in that other thing that we just got, more chemicals were needed to take care and process the water. And doesn't the water coming from Metropolitan Water District come already treated?
It does, yes.
So we don't have, at least we don't have to treat that. Yeah, so.
Yeah, no, Richard, your points are very well taken. You know, I spoke to our interim general manager before this meeting and you know, the engagement with the Raymond Basin, you know, I think is actually increasing. That Pasadena is not the only member of the Raymond Basin, of course, so we are collegiate with and cooperative with the other members. But the one thing I think, you know, I can say, not being the expert myself, but you know, all members of the Raymond Basin share those very concerns that you just described, Richard, about the water levels and the water quality, you know, and what is the long-term sustainability for the basin? You know, what is the responsibility of the members? You know, who can do what? So I think those concerns are actually elevating, and the discussions that you talked about with the Metropolitan Water District as an opportunity to import some of their water to recharge if there's excess water available. All of those are front and center in our conversations, not only with the Raymond Basin, but also with Metropolitan.
All right, and with that, everyone, I think we will go ahead and conclude tonight's meeting. Like I mentioned, we will stay on for a few more minutes if anything else does come up, but otherwise we'll have a recording of this posted by the end of the week. Thank you again, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
I don't see any questions coming in or any last minute raised hands. So I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar and Zoom session, and the recording will be posted by the end of the week. Thanks, everybody.